Well, howdy, howdy. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Well, hey, I appreciate y'all coming out and sharing some of your time on a weekend. I know that you guys probably could be out kayaking or fishing or just watching sports, and I really do value that. I do value the guest speakers that Dr. Tolbert was kind enough to help bring together to tackle this issue. And what we're going to do for today is basically I'll just kind of introduce, put the rules down on how we're going to do Q&As, and then hand this over to Dr. Tolbert, who will lead the initial portion of the discussion, the introductions, and then we'll go into Q&As for the last portion, where y'all's questions you have, we'll basically go through them and try to answer as many as we can within reason. So how we're going to do that is we have some cards down there for y'all. We have pens. We do have extra cards if you guys have more questions you want to tackle. Throughout the session, please feel encouraged to write down questions. And if you want to submit them, just wave at Jacob over there. Professor Jacob over there will come grab the card. He'll go through them, and then he'll kind of just toss them to me as we get closer to the Q&A portion. Or just to keep things kind of simple, we're not going to tackle anything related to firearm policy as it comes to regulations. I know that's something the state and federal guys normally tackle, and that's just beyond our pay grade for today. So a lot of the questions we would hope that you guys ask are related to school safety, hardening schools. How does architecture come into schools? How do you balance school safety with a safe and fun educational experience that gets the students and faculty and staff feeling excited to go to school? And a lot of other really interesting things around that. So having said that, I'm going to take a seat and toss this over to Dr. Tolbert. And again, thank you so much for coming. I want to stress it to y'all. It's a weekend. And I really, really, really do value you guys sharing your time because it's important. And even if you don't feel like this is the case, you guys are leaders. You're showing up. You're not just tweeting. You're actually out here trying to learn more, trying to meet others who care about this issue, and begin your journey to supporting our community. And that is incredible. So I just want to highlight that. And with that being said, Dr. Tolbert.
Hey, Christian, who are you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Want me to? Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. My name is Christian Villegas. I'm actually an alumni from Birdville ISD. I went to Tarrant County College. I went to UVA. I finished a program with Harvard this past year. And I actually work in the medical community now in conjunction with doing work for TILBM, which is an educational institution that serves students here in BISD, Fort Worth ISD, teaching them finance, project management, strategic partnership development, things that high schoolers can take immediately into their real life to grow, hopefully learn a lot, and thrive. So that's kind of what we try to do. Diego, sir.
And I'm going to say thank you to Christian for what he's done. Just because you're young doesn't mean you can't get good stuff done. He's put up really all this. He's the driving force behind all this happening and putting together this really great panel that you have before you. I don't want to stand in the way, but what I want to do quickly is I want to introduce each one, and then I'm going to start with Wayne down on the end and give them about 5 minutes apiece to kind of tell you their opening thoughts about school safety. And then I'm going to ask some questions of them, and then we're going to turn it over to the questions that you guys are writing down, and Christian's going to lead that part. So Wayne Reynaud is on the end. He's back from France. I will not do this, and I would do it in French just so he could feel comfortable. He just got back from France, but I won't. He's a CEO practice leader, education principal at HKS Architecture. He got his undergrad from Louisiana Tech University in architecture, and he was a principal at PBK until 2014, and then he's been on board with HKS ever since. His career is designing quality K-12 schools and higher education facilities. We use him on some of our projects in Birdville, and we'll tell you that we've never been disappointed with HKS's work. They've never disappointed, and they've always over-delivered. So thank you for being here, Wayne. Then right beside him is Dr. Michael Ryan. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Ryan this last summer, and glad that he could be here today. Very interesting background. I won't get into all of it, but he is on the Fort Worth School Board. He was elected in 2021. He's got a master's in education administration and also his doctorate degree in curriculum instruction and instruction technology from Texas A&M University. He, just so you know, he has chops and experience in the in the school arena. He was executive director for teaching. He was executive director for teaching and learning and fine arts for Fort Worth ISD for 6 years, and also was a similar position down in San Antonio before that. And if you'll notice his shirt on, if you have a kid that wants to go to the Naval Academy, he's going to be the guy that you would talk to in this area. That's one of the things that he does. And beside him, we're happy to have Captain Ed Wright with us today. He's a captain at North Texas Hills Police Department, been there 21 years, worked his way up. He has a Bachelor's of Applied Science in Criminal Justice from Texas Wesleyan University. And what's great about him is he oversees the SRO program for BISD. He's also the liaison for BISD. And then Dr. Showell is beside me. He's the Executive Director of Student Services, Head of Security for BISD. He has a PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies from UTA. He served in many educational roles all the way from the math class coach up to principal, and then now his current position. I'm sorry, I didn't want to tell you, when did you present on this?
Just last week.
Yeah, just this past week, he went down to he presented at the Texas School Safety Conference, where his topic was from crisis to reunification, creating a detailed reunification plan using the standard response protocol. I had the pleasure of getting to sit in meetings with him, and he's impressive, and I think you'll enjoy listening to him today. So I want to get out of the way, and Wayne, we'll start with you about 5 minutes. I'll hand you. Okay, sorry. I'm Joe Tolbert. Also, I'm an attorney by day and serve on the Burkeville School Board by night.
Thank you, Mr. Tolbert. Let me give you a little background on me. Obviously, I've got some years on me, 32 years in the school business as an architect, and married to a school teacher. Get a lot of useful input from her over the last 31 years. And we talk about this topic a lot. We've talked about it too much, honestly. We've talked about it every year of our marriage since 1991, starting in 94. And you may be familiar with Jonesboro, Arkansas. We've just got a history in our country. There's a history in the world. We're not the only country plagued with this. With these unfortunate evil events, and I know that everyone is very concerned about how we do that. At HKS, after the Florida event about 4 or 5 years ago, we put together a school safety task force just so we could start an open-end collaboration. And I lead that task force, and it happens mostly by emails, but we have groups that get together. We have offices all over the world that are interested, and one of the things that we do is share and collaborate among our different sectors. HKS has a large sports sector. You're familiar with Globe Life and Cowboy Stadium and SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles, and we've got a pretty good repertoire of professional stadiums. Those stadiums go through a very intrinsic safety evaluation method. Not the same method we use in the school industry, but we can certainly learn a lot of things from their technology and conversations. So that's something that we've been involved in that you will hear interlaced in my conversation. Also, I'm a member of the International Wellbeing Institute, and some of you hear about WELL, W-E-L-L, accredited professionals. And you can look up WELL under the IWBI Well Certified website. Basically, it is an organization put together worldwide for the social and emotional well-being of people, especially young people in our community. And it's everything that we put into a building, including how we manage buildings. Air, water, nutrition, innovation, life, fitness, comfort, mind and movement. And I will talk a little bit about mental health if I get an opportunity. Also, I'm a member of the International Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Association. I've been involved with that association for a very long time. Some of the Burkeville ISD board members and past board members can tell you they've seen me present on some of the evaluations of the schools that we design in terms of the tiers and zones of safety and how we are moving kids through that school and how we're keeping that building safe. And that's a very important topic to them. They set aside a very separate meeting at their board meetings just to discuss that design topic for their schools. So if you want to look up anything on the website about the International Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Association, or CPTED, we call it CEPTED, that's a good one to just make yourself aware of some good design practices. I think they're all about strategies aimed to reduce victimizations, deter offender decisions that precede criminal acts. They try to be proactive. They talk about building a sense of community among the inhabitants of different concentric circles that outreach different types of buildings. Schools are probably number one on that list. Churches probably number two, supermarkets number three, so on and so forth. These are all important buildings in the community. The same people go to all of these buildings in and out. So it's important to know who the people are that go in and out of your buildings, right? So we were told not to talk about politics and school safety, and I think that was a very smart thing to do, especially right now. But I wanted to let you know, I will talk mostly about just good, sensible design that does not threaten. Okay, and what I mean by that is we can build safe schools. I think a lot of the school districts are doing a great job of building safe schools. Schools aren't an active, functioning being. They don't actively save kids' lives, so we need to be careful about talking about we need safer schools. We need a lot of good, safe practice, but we're doing a lot of things right, I think, these days when it comes to the built environment. I think we need to keep having that conversation. So I'll speak to those things, and I'll listen a lot too, because I'm very interested in what everybody on this panel has to say.
Okay. Well, I am Dr. Michael Ryan, and I am head of admissions for United States Naval Academy from DFW to New Mexico and from the Panhandle down to Central Texas. If all of our kids were like the kids I've interviewed over the last 14 years going there, we wouldn't be here today. Okay, and part of that is what we're going to have to get into at some time is what we're doing with our children.
Something went wrong. Please try again.
And if you didn't think that didn't come up with kids in classrooms, I've been doing education for the last 45 years. The first 13 years of that, I was a band director. The biggest problem I had was snare drummers beating the snot out of each other with their sticks. After that, I went to administration. The year that I started 32 years ago in administration, I got hired to be assistant principal at Clean High School on October 1st. And I am about 2 weeks later, had a change that made me start looking at mass shooter things ever since. I happened to have gone to Luby's on the 15th of October. I was walking at the door of Luby's when Charles Reynaud drove his pickup truck through the window, thought it was a gentleman that had a heart attack, went behind the pickup truck and saw him shoot the first person. Went out to my car to get a pistol I carry everywhere and remembered I put it in the safe because I was going out on the military post and I didn't want to get a felony charge against me because I'd had the shortest time probably as a principal in the history of Fort Worth or Killeen ISD because it's been about 15 days I've been out. So ever since that time, I have watched every place I've gone about looking at what happens if you do this. As I've been in different schools, I'm looking how can we make them safe. I went to Pascal High School in Fort Worth. There are 53 outside doors. How do you guard all 53 doors? When I was in Killeen, right after that, we had somebody say there was going to be a drive-by shooting because we had a gang member get killed about 5 blocks from school. And so we started doing metal detectors. The first day we did that, even though we had 3 metal detectors, it took an hour and a half to get all the kids through the metal detectors in class. So you can't do all those things. But school design, how we work with the kids, how we talk to our students, how the teachers talk to the students, how we interact with the community, what's going to help us get past most of these incidents. because we've got to be able to talk. We've got to be able to stop the bullying that goes on in school. And right now, it is a big deal. The last 2 years, all I've done in schools, because I retired in 2013, I've subbed. And I've done it over 100 days each year, mainly because they need people. They couldn't find somebody. I can go out there and I can take control of the classroom. But as I'm watching how the students interact with each other because of COVID and how they got pulled away and they didn't have that interaction, it's developing into stuff even worse. And so there are a lot of things that go on with that we can fix. A lot of things we're going to have to address in this. And the mental part of it is a big part. Hardening the schools is another part. How do you make it harder without making it look like a prison? And that's where he gets to come in and go, maybe we can do this, this, and this. I just, before I came here, was out doing the dedication of a new Kaboom playground at one of our elementary schools. Right by the fence, and one of the first things that somebody said was, what if somebody comes by and starts shooting kids? I can't fix it. I can't fix it at any of the schools we've got here, because none of them have a 12-foot wall with watchtowers all around the school. So that's not going to happen. And if we could do that, we don't have enough money to make it happen. Okay, so those are things we're going to have to work through, but mainly if we can work with all of our kids, because if you go back and look at the shooters and stuff, they were mainly kids in high school. Okay, there've been some outside, but mainly that for our schools. So it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of counseling work, a lot of interaction with the teachers to know how to talk to kids. A lot of times you sit down with the parents and going, we've noticed this problem, talk to your kids. Okay.
Hi, my name is Captain Ed Wright. I've been here for 21 years, and most of when I started my law enforcement career, everybody can call up with the sheriff's department. Actually, I was a typical patrol officer. I worked in SWAT. Decided I wanted to expand my horizons, so I came over here. When I came over here, when I started out in typical patrol officer, moved into training, FTO, stuff like that. But when I promoted to sergeant, I was lucky enough that I became the SRO sergeant. So I was over the SROs for about 6.5 years during Sandy Hook, during Parkland, and from what you'll hear from me, mostly that I'm going to talk about, I'm a boots on the ground kind of person. I deal from practical experience dealing with schools, students, things like that. So what you'll hear from me is about policy, practices, training, and compliance. Because if we keep all those things going, we'll be able to mitigate most of these issues. School districts have worked with BISD for a very, very long time. School districts in general have very good target hardening structures, things of that nature. But we still have to be compliant with what we do. We have to have the right policies, things of that nature. So I'll be talking about stuff like that. I'll be talking about SROs. I'll answer the questions that come in on things like that. I've also served as SWAT commander, and I also served as a special events coordinator. So I've been to a large number of trainings in reference to special events. I've been to a large number of special events. I've been part of supervising in a large number of special events. Think about AT&T Stadium, the Ranger Stadium, things like that. We have a mutual aid agreement with them, so I would go out there with a number of officers and we would work and help them with things out there, where I learned an incredible lot about how things work in hugely crowded areas and how to contain those things. And like I said, a lot of things deals with your policy, your practices, your training, and being compliant with all that stuff. So those are things that you're going to hear from me. When I promoted to captain, I was lucky now that I've gone back to kind of like my roots. I'm now over all the SRO program. So I work with Dr. Showell, I work with Dr. Kemp, I've worked with a lot of the BISD staff on the different things that have happened over the last decade. And there are a number of things that have changed, and there are a number of the things that have stayed the same. So we'll go into all those. We'll talk about SROs, we'll talk about target hardening, we'll talk about all that stuff as we go along and answer the questions that you have. But that's what you'll get from me.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Joseph Showell. I've been in education for 30 years, and I started out going to school. I did not go to school here. I went to Trinity right next door, but competed against Halton, competed against Richmond. I had a niece that graduated from Halton, and then one niece graduated from Richmond. and her sister graduated from Birdville because Birdville wasn't built when the older sister went to school. So I've had strong ties to Birdville ISD with other family members and truly committed to the safety and security of this district. We're extremely fortunate. We have the full support of Dr. Stinson, superintendent, and our board. There have been some things that we've purchased, like a program called Navigate 360, which allows us to track potential threat assessment students in our district. And then another program, Anonymous Alerts, gives us the ability to track reports of threats or violence. And, you know, when I came to the district 3 years ago, we did not start with a blank slate. Dr. Kim and his team really had audits, had walkthroughs, and had things of that nature already going. If anything, we just found a way to document them a little differently. But we're very fortunate that systems were in place. The district's leadership supports safety and security. And so what you'll hear from me, information about our systems. How do we interact with the SROs? How do we interact at the campus level to ensure that the campuses are as safe as possible? How are we responding to potential threats that exist within our district? How are we trying to, what we like to say, get students off the pathway so that those students are not going to act out on their threats? So that's what we bring.
I was just ask everybody here, I wish I had a quarter for every time somebody said, if the schools would just, and the reality is it's more complicated than that. If you think you have it figured out, you don't. And let me give you a quick example. What did you do? What was the one drill you did when you were in school? They would take you outside because you had a what? A what drill?
Fire drill.
You had a fire drill. What do you do if there's toxic smoke, if there's fire, if there's chemicals that have been released? The fire alarm goes off and you dutifully walk outside with your teacher. You walk outside of the building that we've hardened, that we've done all this to. You walked outside because that's your policy. It's exactly what happened in Parkland. The guy pulled one of the fire alarms and all the kids started coming out. Then he stopped shooting. So if you think you have it all figured out and that you just do this or do that, it's more complicated than what you're thinking. So so keep an open mind when you're talking about this, and I think that will help everybody. Also, just as a school board member, I just want to point out that there's 1,200 school districts, both charter and public in Texas. That's 8,800 campuses. That's a lot of people. If we're going to staff each one of those, there's some discussion at big high schools. So Allen High School has 6,000 students. Can that be successfully? I mean, my hometown that I grew up in was half that size. So is that going to be successfully handled by one SRO? So some of these campuses are going to obviously take more than one. The City Council of Fort Worth recently discussed that they have SROs, and Dr. Ryan will talk about this, but they have SROs in their high school and middle school, but they don't cover their elementary at this point. And the City Council said that it'd probably take 200 officers. And I was talking to another police chief the other day at a gathering, and he said, hey, I'll conservatively put about $100,000 price tag on an officer that's an SRO that's being shared by the city. And there's debates about that. But let's say it's $100,000, you can do the math, 200 officers, that's $20 million that the city would be for those. On the top of that, Officer Wright can also tell you that cities are struggling to find people that are drug-free and have the background that will allow them to be in the police force, especially during this time we've come out of, where sometimes in the police as a profession was not one that was maybe smiled upon by certain folks. So to hire 200 more people when they're already behind officers in nearly every municipality, we got to be practical here. So with those things, I was going to start the questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Do you want to introduce Carlos?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our colleagues just got here. His name is Carlos Trustee, so I'm pronouncing it right. He works as a journalist. He just joined the clerk's office in Fort Worth, correct? District. And you know what? I think it's fair just to have him introduce himself real quick. I can't do as much justice to that.
My apologies. I had to run an errand. I'm here now. Well, my name is Carlos Trustee. I'm the precinct sheriff for Caldwell Center for Turner County. And I'll be working for the district clerk's office next week as an associate court clerk, so that'll be fun. But I have been heavily involved in school board politics, especially with FWISD, and I think public safety should be a #1 concern for a lot of schools and districts in the state of Texas. So we hope we can get some good answers and feedback from this discussion, and we hope that we can make a positive impact. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And so if you want, you can, I know you were going to have to for a little bit of the panel. Or do you want to just leave it there? Okay, awesome. So, and real quick before I give this back to Dr. Tolbert, I know we started a few minutes later, just so everyone had a chance to sit down and get comfortable. So we might go a few minutes after the deadline at 4:15. Again, the next phase, if I'm correct, is just the panel discussion and questions that were pre-written. That'll be a 25-minute discussion. As you guys hear what they share and what they're talking about, please feel encouraged to write down questions, wave out so Jacob can grab them. Again, if they're related to firearm policy and legislation, we're probably going to have to hold off on them today. But if it's other things related to that, but more so on our topics, Jacob will be kind of determining those questions. Beyond that, thank you again for being here, and thank you, sir.
Okay, let's start off with this, and whoever wants to jump in, just kind of raise a finger or something, I'll grab you the microphone. There is an inherent tension between designing a school to maximize the learning environment versus hardening the school. For example, studies show open, well-lit areas with a connection to the outside create a great learning environment, while some of those goals might not be best from a security standpoint. Please discuss some of the tensions between what can be done to reconcile these two goals.
Okay, I see you looking at me. I was, yeah. So I would ask, what are the tensions? Okay, why can't we have natural light in a space and that not be a secure space? So I believe lines of sight produce proactive management and see threats coming. So a lot of people think, well, let's go back to the 60s and close up our windows. It's not a good answer, in my opinion. I think the data also shows it's not a good answer, right? I think when we talk about good, sensible, safe design that does not threaten, and when I put that in words, when I write that down, and when I speak about it at other symposiums, it's about spaces that make students want to learn. Spaces need to be very comfortable for students to perform their best. The experience that a student has when they arrive to school and how they get in school needs to be a good experience. So they're motivated instead of frightened. And it's a hard thing to balance for us to watch over them and keep them safe, right? Because we need them to feel like they can be at their best. To be a school student, that's what they are going to that facility to do, right? So we need to protect that. I think that's part of the safety in any school space. I think we need to detect a threat as soon as possible, and there are a lot of layers to that. I like what you said about the 360 program, Dr. Showell, and being able to detect threats before they even arrive on a campus and respond to them proactively. I think entrances to buildings are important. I think if there are, like in the schools that I went to, 57 doors, and I went to school in Louisiana, so the buildings weren't even connected by hallways back then in the late 60s and early 70s. And kids were just running around 5-6 times a day, going in and out every door. I think it's important to have an identifiable architectural element that serves as your entry, that everyone knows where to go. Parents, I'm talking about visitors. We can get kids in a school safely, right? We can do that. The thing is, who's coming to that school that's not that student, that's imposing the threat on the student? We need them directed to a very specific spot. And good entries and nice architecture will help that. It'll keep people from wandering around, wondering where they should go in the door. And I think secured vestibules are very important. And what constitutes a secured vestibule, we can discuss if you have questions. But I think the detection should be discreet. And I think that we also need to learn how to set up security zones, safe zones in schools that are not threatening. And you can do that with technology, good hardware, and good management skills. I'll leave the rest for another question. Pass it on down.
So I'll speak briefly a little further into that type of stuff. As was already mentioned, it's true, most active shooter issues in schools are done usually by a student from the school. Well, there are some exceptions that we've seen, but most of them are done by active shooters that have already gained access to the school. They know the access, they have an ID card. BISD has a very good system of how people and should kids get in school. They have an ID, they get in school. They have a very closed system of, they come in, they're directed directly to the office. You can't get into the school without having an ID or going to the office, which is great. The one thing that you talk about these types of things, you talk about open areas, stuff like that, I'm absolutely for that. You have to have that, and someone tell you, if you make it look like a jail, it's gonna be treated like a jail. And so that's you can't do that to the kids. So then you have to go look at a different level, because you're gonna have kids that, you know, if you run into one of these issues where you're gonna have a kid that's gonna come in, this is the worst day of his life, he's been planning something, something's gonna happen, he's already gonna have access to the school. He already has it. So what do we do once he has access and he's already in there? So we can do a lot of things to minimize outside people getting in, but we have to look at what do we do once we got somebody that's actually in there. And that's when we talk about physical security. Knowing the kids, knowing where the safe spaces are, where do they go, stuff like that. That's what they have to know. Armed security, you're gonna have to have that. We have that in the form of SROs and armed officers that are there. But you have to combine those two, because we have to start thinking about some of those things. We can target harden, and we'll talk about some of that stuff in a little bit. But I totally agree. You cannot close off the school, make it look like a jail. That's the worst thing you could do to the kids. So we have to look at what are we going to do to minimize something once it's in there. And again, it'll have to be kids knowing what they need to do if something happens, and how do we address that threat once it happens. And those are things we'll talk about.
As a former algebra teacher, sunshine always helps, because when you're teaching a difficult subject for students, if you have a place for them to learn that's open, that helps. But from a safety and security perspective, what we say is locks, lights, out of sight. And if there is an active shooter situation, whether internal threat, external threat, our goal is to have our staff, students, who's ever in the building, turn off the lights, make sure the doors are locked, and get out of sight. Some buildings make that a little bit more challenging, and that's where we have to work a little bit harder. What we're trying to do is generate 3 to 5 minutes response time for the police to come and neutralize the threat. So to the point of the question, that might be part of the open concept for learning. As a teacher of a tough subject, I appreciated that, but as a safety and security specialist, locks, lights, out of sight, trying to generate 3 to 5 minutes of time for response is our goal.
I know you have a lot of other questions. I think that's a fantastic point. And we talk a little bit about the torturous path, and that may sound awful, but it's very proactive. And we rate the tiers of sections of the building in what we call a pathway or a fallback position, if you will, in any of these type of spaces. And you can call them security zones if you want to. But we try to stay away from words like security zones, because the school's hardened a little bit. It's thinking about where students and teachers can go safely, and that should be priority one as soon as the button is hit, so to speak. And I think that point is important. If you have an open collaboration space in your classroom wing, that can be separated from the main hallways to the entry in the cafeterias and library, because we're trying to get back to the safest place possible, right? And that's always according to, I work with a lot of school districts, and I have this conversation a lot inside the classroom. Lock, lights, out of sight, out of mind, quiet. And there's protocols with windows involved. You pull the curtain, draw the shade, whatever it is. And that has proven to be the safest place to be if you add up all the hundreds of active shooting events at schools in our country in the 19th and 20th century. That has proven to be the safest place to be. Unfortunately, in two of the most recent ones, it wasn't. So we're thinking about that environment. Do we start to put shared closets or storage rooms? Teachers love storage. It's going to cost you a little extra money, Joe. But can there be a little bit of 150 square feet where that could also be a panic room? Don't store anything on the floor. But those teachers at Newtown, they hit a lot of kids in some small cabinets, and they saved a lot of lives that day. Okay, that's a fallback space, right? Then that's even one tier safer than the classroom. So think about that as a possibility. The collaboration area is connected. It connects all the classrooms in a classroom wing. Well, there could be doors that automatically shut and lock if a button is hit. That technology exists today. BISD does that, and you can't even tell there are doors there in the middle of a normal day. It's nice and it's open. You walk from the library into the classroom wing, and there's 3 or 4 classroom wings in a school, right? And if that button is hit, those doors can shut and lock. Okay, only the police officers will know how to get in and around those. The teachers hide and wait. So I appreciate exactly what I'm hearing from both of you, because I think holistically, talking about how these designs work and how this management works, and I love the term you use, compliance. I mean, if you leave a rock in your door, it's not compliance. If you leave your cell phone out in your car, it's okay, go get your cell phone, but make sure that door shuts behind you and walk around to the front office like everyone else has to do. And tell them, it's a little shameful, I left my cell phone out in the car, and I know I'm not supposed to have it while I'm teaching or while I'm learning, whichever it is, but we've got to buckle down on compliance. And I've said a lot there, so next question maybe.
That kind of leads us in to the next, talking about compliance. One of the things, obviously the latest municipality, so there's some things down there. We heard that the chief at that point had laid his walkie-talkie or communication device down so he could have both hands free to engage the active shooter. So he had no communication at that point. And then there was also some discussion of a key that apparently wasn't needed, but the door might have been locked. So there's some things that we all know that we have great plans, and we know that it never works out like our plans. So what is it that schools do, and what schools, and police departments, especially with Berkeley, we encompass several cities, so we need all those cities to work together. There's a lot to that, but what are some ways that we should have training to make sure there's compliance and make sure there's that everybody knows where any needed keys are, that communications are always going to be there, that inter-city police departments are talking, that the cities are talking to our staff. Just there's a whole lot to that. So who wants to lead off? Yeah.
So for years, we worked with the BISD for years on our drills. We use the schools to do what's called our alert training, which is the standard training for responses to active shooters. We work with Birdville. We know where the keys are. We know how to access the keys to all the classrooms. But I'm not going to really get in. I can't get into every single little security thing that we do with Birdville. But we do train with them. We have trainings on an annual basis on how we're going to respond they know how we're gonna respond, and they know what we need of them when we respond to anything that happens within the school. The keys itself, when we respond, are not our priority. We are not looking for those keys when we respond. He was talking about what happened, down there. Training is one of my major things that I want to make sure that people understand, is you have to train on what you do, and you have to understand the mindset of what you need to do when you go there. Our job as police, when we show up at the school, is to stop the killing and then stop the dying. It's kind of a blunt statement, but that's what our job is. And that's unfortunately a failure of what happened down there. I'm not going to go into the whole Valdi thing because I haven't read the brief yet, so I'm not really going to comment on it. But from our perspective, we train on a constant basis. We train in the schools. They know what we're going to do. We do lockdown drills. The police come teach the schools with the administrators. We do the lockdown drills with them to see what's happening. And we try to make sure that those things are done like as a surprise to them, because the only way we can make sure things are going better is if we see what went wrong when we do our lockdown drills. And so we've done a fantastic job, I believe, of beginning to do those every year, multiple times a year. First off, it's required, and then we've already been doing those. So training is already happening. The biggest thing with the training, is being compliant with what's happening. And that's both from the sides of, as mentioned, putting a rock in front of a door, going out, it's not being compliant with what you were supposed to do. That's not, as fast as you may think, you set up basically a perfect storm of multiple bad things happening, and we saw that. So being compliant, comply with your training. Principals, things like that, making sure that their teachers are compliant with the training. Going back to kind of talking about locking down, Virgil's got an excellent system within their classroom, where kids are supposed to be, how they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to lock down. It works very, very well. Before I finish, I'll say, there's a video out there going over the after action of what happened in Parkland. And they talk about, and they actually do movements that shows everybody's movement inside Parkland High School, what happened, what happened there. And you can see, when we talk about compliance, the things that didn't go well, what happened that caused what happened. And that's one of my biggest things is policy, practice, training, and compliance with all that stuff. If you do that, it helps them. You're not going to stop there, but it will help minimize some of this stuff.
I think the one thing that I would add, obviously Dr. Kemp has been in the district for a long time, and he's one of the pillars. When Mr. McNeil and myself came to our roles in the district, we wanted to make sure we met all of our different cities' police chiefs. We wanted to make sure that we established a relationship with them. So we have regular meetings with the captains, sergeants, and then we meet with our SROs monthly, so that we can make sure we're all on the same page with response to whatever crisis may exist. And then one of the things, again, I told you our board and our superintendent were extremely supportive. Navigate 360 is a program that we use to document after action reports for drills. So instead of just having a drill and having the paperwork for the drill in a file folder somewhere, that information is uploaded into Navigate 360. Dr. Kemp reviews that information, provides feedback to the campuses on how they executed the drill, how we saw the drill went. So I would just add that communication, getting to know people, and then follow up on safety drills is something to add.
I'll go in. The most important thing we do in case of that kind of situation like that is the students have to have gone through training after training after training and drill. I did not know what all the signals were as I was starting to sub in a lead up. And I've been there about 5 days, and the alarm went off, and I'm just, okay, what's going on? And before I could even get in gear, I had 3 students that were moving, everybody's moving to one side of the class, and understand we're in a new elementary school. So right by the door, there's these 2 big glass panels. So they've got blinds on them. Here are these panels, so you can see in a lot of the classroom. All the kids are moving back to the corner where you couldn't see in. One student goes, pulls the mag stripe off the door, because all the doors were automatic locking doors, so you couldn't get into them. But they put a mag stripe down on by the deal so that the latches can't engage while class is going on. This kid pulls it out, puts it in, drops it on the floor, he's going over. Another one turn up the lights, another one close the blinds, they're all over there. Within 5 seconds, the room's safe, except for me, because I'm standing in the middle of it going, what do we do? You know, and the kids knew what to do. And I'm sitting there, and that was elementary, and so did it change? Well, they happen to have the same thing, similar happened at Benbrook Middle High School in Fort Worth, in that the clerk was moving a set of books over on the counter, and it hit one of the hidden buttons under the counter that set off the alarm for lockdown. And so 2 things happened. One, the kids, probably 95% of them did exactly what they're supposed to do. There were a couple of them were yahoos that weren't doing the right thing. But then the big deal was they overloaded all the cell phone towers because of the massive calls going out to moms and dads who were all of a sudden coming in from all over the city and leaving jobs and everything else, just dropping stuff to go. And they realized 5 minutes into it, that it was a false alarm. And the biggest problem they had then was how did they communicate with all those parents that it was just a mistake. And so the good news was the kids do what they're supposed to do. And those are things that we're just going to have to continually do. It's a shame we've got to do that now. When I went to high school, I had a shotgun in my car, and this AP came out to look at it because he thought it was neat. I was going, definitely. It doesn't happen anymore. And so we're going to have to sit there, and the kids are going to have to take their time to work that. It has to be automatic, and the teachers have to know that there's it's a non-flexible policy about these are givens that you're going to have to follow. We're not going to stick something in the door on days we've got kids here. If we have to do that, you've got to go in and out. We've got a lot of movement, and we're going to need somebody there so if they have to, they can shut that door right down, and we know it's going to lock. And like they said, we got 8,000 something schools. We've got more than 34,000 doors. It's going to take a lot of work.
Architecturally speaking, all those systems, like on a new school, they need to be tested. There's a lot of technology out there for card readers. That's one good answer, to put card readers on, say, 5 or 6 or 10 primary doors, primary and secondary doors, where teachers can still go out, doors shut, doors lock. Their card access is the only way to get back in. They're managing their group of students in and out, so they always know where their students are. So some of those things are good for the whole environment, how it works. Cameras, those things need to be commissioned. You need to make sure they all work right. When they're new, we call it a punch list, a punch process to work all the bugs out. So those things are very important to us. Teacher training, drills, just on the hardware. The things we're talking about, doors locking, hardware can be a very complicated thing, and construction practices aren't as good as they used to be quite honest. They can't line up a door strike with a door piece of hardware anymore very well. Sometimes they get hung up. We got to walk the building and go, this door won't lock. And the other thing you may be wondering about is the lock blocks on the doors. That's not a thing the school districts want to do, in my experience. There are some fire marshals in certain cities that think the lock blocks are a good idea, because fire emergency is also another kind of an emergency where you've got to get kids out of buildings, and they don't want doors locked where kids can't unlock them or teachers can't unlock them with smoke. But there's also easy hardware called panic hardware where you don't need lock blocks, but you've got to do what the code officials tell you to do in certain cases and still be safe and work around those things. They're all trying a lock block. You were talking about not enough knock spots for your keys, but these little bitty lock blocks that some city fire marshals have the teachers put in the door lock to keep the door from pulling all the way shut.
It's just a security device.
So they don't lock themselves in by accident. And I would say we should update our hardware so that's not an issue, right? So you can always have a door that's locked on the outside, but can panic out in case of fire. that hardware does exist, and hardware upgrades would be one of the first things I would take a look at in any school district. So just if those things kind of promoted some questions in your mind, I wanted to address that from an architectural standpoint.
There's a lot of great topics and running short on time. But one thing though that Dr. Ryan brought up that is an issue, and let me say very quickly, it's not my word. It's the head of the Texas State Police said that the involved police response was an abject failure. So we're going to ignore that for this. We're going to assume that the police here have been trained, that they're going to show up and they're going to do the right thing, in which I know they will. So with that in mind, tell us about parent involvement. Everybody wants to save their baby bear, but at the same time, police have to do their job. And then also we need reunite everybody after such an event. So who wants to kind of talk about those issues?
Sure. So I think parent involvement can touch a lot of areas. Working with your own child is a critical one to make sure that your child knows how to communicate with you about behaviors that may be of concern from another classmate. Making sure that your child knows how to report those behaviors to the district so that the district can follow up. Talking to your child about safety and security is just as important as talking to them about AP, advanced academics, pathways to college, etc. It just has to be a normal part of the conversation. Social media is definitely an area where parents can support schools because students' access to social media and some of the things that they're following could cause students to make some bad decisions. And then to know more about the resources that we have in our district. We have Ms. Broadwater, who is our crisis counselor. She has counselors that support all of our students at all of our campuses. So when parents do come across something, know that the district has committed resources to giving a response to what you come up with. And then ask questions. Feel free to, when you talk to the campus administrators, ask questions that are around safety and security. Feel free to reach out to them and share concerns that you might see at a basketball game or a fine arts competition or something, but that it should become more and more readily that you have parents providing questions and support.
Like, we have one more, and one thing that comes up a lot, and it may be on there, but I'd like to hear you guys quickly because we want to turn it over to their questions. But one thing that comes up a lot is arming personnel in the district. Do you guys have any thoughts, pro or con on that?
I have a thought on it, but I probably should go last.
I would take it first. I was teaching a class on superintendency, University of North Texas. I had the superintendent from Northside ISD and the two Northsides. This is the one north of Vernon, Texas. He had 8 people, and this was 20 years ago, had 8 people in the school district that were armed that he knew. Nobody else knew other than that he was also armed, because he's going to the nearest deputy is probably 20 to 30 minutes away. And so they worked with him, but they also did, to be able to do that, they had to be trained. They were training every 3 months in drills. They had special frangible ammunition so it wouldn't go through walls and stuff. They even went through psychological exams once a year just to make sure that they weren't in there just because they wanted to do a Rambo on somebody. So one thing I will say is I never want a teacher with a gun that doesn't want to do it, and that we haven't done all the checks on it possible. Because if they don't want to do it, they sure don't have to do it, and it shouldn't be, any of that shouldn't be their expense. That's some of the district's got to do.
There's a lot of school districts have started doing those things, call them school marshals, call them whatever you want. There are teachers that are ended up being armed. There's some things to think about with that. First off, a teacher's responsibility when something happens is to lock down their class. Their job is to lock down their class with the students in their class. So having this teacher armed in this class, are you asking them then to leave their students? And that goes against everything that we teach the teachers to do. That goes against everything they're instructed to do. So if you have, all you're really doing is introducing more guns into a learning environment. Are they going to keep it in a safe in their drawer? Well, okay, well, if somebody enters their classroom, unfortunately, if they didn't comply to keeping the door locked and they've been in their classroom, they're not going to be able to get to that. So there's a lot of issues with arming teachers. I will tell you from our point of view, I'm not a teacher, so I don't teach. I don't believe a teacher should be using a weapon in the school when their job is to take care of the kids. My job is to take care of the other issues. Or the armed security officer, that's his job. That's his only job. It's not to take care of the kids in the class. So if you're asking the teacher to do multiple things, I think it becomes too much.
In my 30-year experience, I've had teachers that did an amazing job. And I have teachers that I know for a fact are mature enough and can handle another level of responsibility. But I've also had teachers that had their cell phones stolen, that have had their car keys stolen, which led to their car being stolen. I've just seen things happen that, would this be a weapon that they keep on them all the time? I have a lot of questions about that. And I think I heard someone say in areas where there was an act of a teacher with a weapon, there was no school shot up, or because there was somebody there with a weapon. Well, there are police officers there with a weapon. And I trust our police officers in Birdville, from knowing them, from working with them, from training with them, to make a response in 3 to 5 minutes that would mitigate any major significant result. If we were in a rural area where they were struggling to find officers, that might be different. But the 5 cities that we work with, I trust them. I feel like they would respond, and I don't think there's a need here in our district.
Yeah, absolutely, Phil. Thank you so much, by the way, for Dr. Tolbert for putting together these questions. And thank you everyone again for sharing your time. We're going to phase into the questions from the guests. We want to try to honor you guys and get as many of them tackled. We're going, because we started late, we were supposed to close at 4:15. We're going to push that to 4:30. I do really value y'all's presence. Before we begin with the guest questions, I do want to first say thank you to all the folks who shared the invite and spread the word of this event. As you can see, we have a lot of people here. In particular, I want to highlight Mr. Eric Moritz, Carlos Tercios, Dr. Tolbert, and Jacob Poe, too, for pressing this and promoting it in the community. Again, everyone here is a leader because they are here, regardless of if they're elected or traditional civilian. And that is something I want you all to take personally, because that is something fundamental to the mindset of taking things personally, taking personal responsibility to serve your community. So I appreciate those gentlemen. Before we go into questions with the guests that have asked questions, I just want to highlight that y'all are here. Please be proud that you're here, and please be excited. And if you have more questions that we can't answer today, don't feel discouraged. You're now thinking about those questions, which means you can talk to your professor. You can reach out to a faculty or staff. You can reach out to the board. You can reach out to the police and very politely ask you those questions. And more importantly, we're recording this today, but technology can be weird. I'm a little bit nervous if we're going to get the whole thing recorded or the audio. You guys have the wisdom now from these incredible guest speakers. I would encourage you to try as you leave to digest those thoughts and see how you can reprise them on Facebook or with your family or with your colleagues. That way, to the best of your abilities, you can at least give the rest of the community a fragment of what you learned today, because that is a big deal, and that will help as we continue this community effort to strengthen our schools, all that good stuff. Having said that, I'm gonna get back to the questions. I'm gonna get back to asking them. We have 25 minutes. I would ask the incredible guest speakers to be as concise and brief with these questions. That way we can honor as many as possible. And again, I really appreciate y'all being here, sharing your time. It's a weekend. I really can't stress that enough. It's a weekend, and I really value that y'all are out here, everyone here. So moving forward with the questions, a really good one that came out. And again, pardon me, I'm not a teacher myself, so I struggle to read some handwriting sometimes. I know teachers get really good at that over their years. One of the questions is, how do you identify at-risk students once they are identified? How are they approached by counselors, and are parents involved in the discussions? So I'm going to pass that on, and you can kind of go through it.
Well, the state has several indicators for identifying at-risk students: socioeconomic, did they fail a grade, have they failed classes? So they look at attendance, they look at multiple components to determine if a student is at risk. Now, with our district threat assessment, teachers, students, anyone can recommend a student to our district threat assessment. And then that student will be screened at the campus level and met with by the threat assessment team that exists at each one of our campuses. And then that student, if the team feels that that student is at risk and a threat, they would upload that student into our district system. And then at the district level, our district threat assessment team would then monitor their interactions and their interventions.
I think we do either guests. Anyone? Okay. Or is there anyone else who wants to answer that question? Okay. Another really good question that came out is, let me read it, pardon me if I read it poorly. Some of the policies for, and this is relevant to, having students that might be disillusioned and lead to these tragedies. Some of the policies for bullying favor the bully, punish the victim. For instance, when a child makes an outcry of bullying, the school offers to allow the victim to change classes. In my opinion, this uproots and removes the victim from their normal routine. These kinds of policies, I feel, promote more bullying instead of preventing it. Have we considered evaluating the policies for bullying? Plus, have we analyzed their effectiveness in regards to the child who is the victim?
Well, having gone through a lot of these and been a principal, part of what we're doing is, in many cases, school districts have adopted a program of restorative discipline to try to get the kids back in the classroom. I was talking to one of our administrators just yesterday and posed, maybe we have to do if they're wearing hoodies in school and they keep pulling it up, we put them in school suspension for a day. Well, we don't want them to miss class. And I'm going, so how do we temper and get through? I didn't follow the rules. And part of that is every administrator, every school district, every school board member can have to sit there and say, we want high expectations. That has to come from parents, that has to come from school people. This is what we expect, and that's more than just how you act in school, but that's what school looks like on the outside, what it looks like on the inside. Guarantee you that if you've got a school that looks nice, they take care of it, stuff's picked up, kids care about it, they care about it, then there's a little bit more caring going on in the school, because you will have kids that are bullies, and it needs to be, you've got to look at it, we're not going to allow that, this is what's going to happen, and it's been very easy to move the kids, well, let me put you in the classroom. And you've got to get there, and we're working with administrators now on, that's not the proper answer. We're going to go to the kid that was being the bully, and how are we going to deal with that? And you've got to, if you have to be removed from that group, well, why were you picking on that other student? And find out what's going on, because then the counselors have to get involved, and you've got to go through a lot of issues like that. So that's not an easy answer or an easy question to deal with. Because it's just the same as we're going to go through with red flag laws. There's a lot of questions, a lot of problems. and everybody's got an excuse for every problem they've got. And they'll bring that out, and I guarantee you that if I've got a kid like that, the parents, a lot of times are even more excusing of that student's actions.
In 10 seconds, if I could just add, in Birdville ISD, if a parent has a concern about a consequence that one of our amazing principals has issued, the track line is assistant principal, appeal to principal. If you don't feel like there's restitution there, then you can come to my office, and Greg McNeil handles elementary, and then I handle secondary. And oftentimes, just that next level of communication helps explain why a decision was made to the satisfaction of the parent. So feel comfortable knowing that in our district, we have that track, and feel free to give us a call.
Thank you. So the next question we have from the guests are, how full, and pardon me if I read this poorly, how foolproof is the command and control in active shooter situations in a SRO program? And then I can't read that word, but it says, a school district having its own police department. I think it's asking, should it be that school districts have their own police department? That might be the second portion of the question.
So the first part of that question is about the command and control during an active shooter. Quickly, I'll answer that. And again, what you saw in Uvalde was not how it's supposed to work. That was completely awful. Officers are trained, when you enter a school, you're not waiting for what's called command and control during an active shooter. You go in with what's called contact strike teams. You go in, you make contact with the shooter, you end that threat, and then you begin to give life-saving measures to anybody that's already been injured. So we talk about command and control. During the immediate action of an active shooter, the officers already know what their responsibilities are. They do not have to wait for me to show up to say, okay, do this, do that, do this. Our training through all of our cities around here, because we all work together, by the way, we're all on the same dispatch channel, we know what to do. We don't wait for stuff like that, and you should not wait for stuff like that. That is a recipe for disaster, and you've seen now what happens when that happens. So command and control during the course of the incident, that the officers know what to do. They are in command. They do what they need to do. After the event, command and control ICS models come into play, but that is after the event is done. So that answers that part. School ISDs, police departments. I had a discussion with somebody else about this. You have to be in very large school districts that have a large amount of money. Those may work. What you want to be able to make sure of is that you have the ability to fund that, make sure you fund it correctly and you train them correctly. What you see on very small ISD police departments is the lack of funding, which means that the pay for the officers is very low, which means that the candidates you're attracting for those tends to not be your top quality people. And from our perspective, we want the top quality officers guarding our most valuable treasure, which is our kids. Right. So, the lower end ones, it's probably not a good idea. It's better to contract out. Here we contract with BISD. We have officers that are fully trained, and we rotate them every 6 years. And the reason we do that here, and going back to some tried and true things you saw in Parkland, what happened when an officer's been somewhere for 23 years in a position, he no longer function that well as a police officer. So we rotate them every 6 years so they maintain their law enforcement skills and abilities, because it is a diminishing skill if you're not constantly dealing with the public and dealing with law enforcement issues. So that's how, I hope I answered that question good enough, but that's how we do it here. We have SROs, they're fully trained. We rotate them every 6 years to make sure that they stay on top of their game. And again, the smaller ISD police departments, there's better ways to take care of those issues.
I just learned something very quickly. I'll jump in. Is Officer Walden at Richland High School was beloved by all the kids. They did not want to see him leave. And he came back to the graduation and hugged on all the kids. They really missed him. That That's a great point. I didn't realize that the guy in Parkland who's been there 23 years has lost his edge. So I will start telling people, people have asked me, why did you let Officer Walden leave? And that's a great answer.
And if I can flag something else, that the fact that the students really miss this officer is a big deal. It indicates a level of trust and love for someone in the police force that allows these younger students to have a role model, someone they can lean on. Maybe one of those kids talks to the officer and says, "Hey, sir, what are your thoughts on this?" You know, or my dad said this. What are your thoughts? And that's good because it allows for an opportunity for these young men and women to begin to have someone strong in their life from a security point of view that can inspire them possibly to try to do what Dr. Brian had mentioned earlier, and is effectively protect their own. So that is cool, and I do want to flag that Birdville ISD and the Fort Worth ISD can create these relationships is a big deal. And it is something that we as a community need to try to protect and honor, because you never know, there will be a student that might try to be the hero and will be the hero, as we've seen in tragedies at theaters and other locations. And that might be because they were inspired by what an officer had taught them or shown. So, getting off track for a moment there, getting back to the next question that was really, really good was, in the aftermath of all the school shootings, children are scared to go to school. I've heard that we don't want to militarize schools because kids need to be comfortable. My argument would be that kids aren't comfortable when they don't feel safe either. What studies have been done that state that children don't perform well in stricter and more secure schools?
Just particular studies, and I've got some websites here if you want afterwards. The School Assessment for Environmental Typology, Safety, an observational measure of the school environment. It revolves around the community and what common things need to take place. That's by Catherine E. Bradshaw and some of her cohorts. It's been well recognized in the community since 2015 for school safety, community safety through mental illness. And I have a PowerPoint that I should have printed out because I don't have my laptop with me. I have it with me, I just don't have it on the table. But it's a study about that very thing. And I can't quote it verbatim, but I'll share it with you afterwards in terms of traumatization of students. There was a doctor, I can give you her name afterwards. She was on a symposium that I was conducting one time, and she and some of the other educational professionals in our office put together a study in Dallas ISD about how kids felt about the traumatization of just going, not even through just the shootings, but the training, the active training. And the small children in elementary school were scared just because of the training. And they would interview the students, and they would say things like, I'm very scared that my friend's gonna get shot. Just different things like that. So we're trying to do all these right things, and we're putting all these ideas in our kids' minds that they have to live with. And I'll give you what that study was afterwards. I'm sorry I don't have that one right on top of my head, and I didn't write that one down in my notes, but I can give you access to that.
Just a real quick follow-up to that. After the Uvalde thing went down, I have elementary school kids. I don't know how many have elementary school kids, but you saw probably a number of police departments put extra officers out there. Sometimes there's that copycat thing that goes on, and every parent's always worried about that. Of course, I was too, because it's just my job to worry. So I was horribly worried about it, but where my kids go to school, there's not normally, in elementary schools, unfortunately, we don't normally have SROs or armed officers. But on those days, I saw they put two officers there where my kids go to school, and that was a relief to me, and it was a relief to most parents that I talked to. There was always this thing about, you hear this, that it's going to scare kids if there's an officer there. It's actually the complete opposite. Kids generally, they wave at the officers, they like the officers, but you got this thing going on, like, I'm just gonna scare kids if they see an officer there. That is not true. Every school I've gone to, the elementary school where I've gone there because there was an issue going on where we needed to put extra officers, you're there. They wave at you and they love having you there, and the parents are much more relieved when they see officers there. So that relieves some of the tension that they have, believe it or not, that kids see that's there, and parents too, because I'm one of them, and I was very relieved when I saw officers there.
Awesome. So we got 5 minutes left. I'm gonna ask that the guests try to quickly answer the last couple questions. We have so many good questions, and it is a tragedy, but again, public servants, feel free to email them these questions. Feel free to reach out to TILBM, and I can try to pass them along. And again, when you send an email that's very polite and kind and inquisitive, in my experience at least, you often get a really good response back. So the next question we have is insider threat versus outsider threat. Are we focusing too much on outsider threats? What are the guardrails for tracking an insider threat?
So again, we have the district threat assessment committee, and all campuses identify students that they feel are potential threats based off the history of shootings. These people that committed these acts were on a radar. And so it's our goal, based off of the number of students that we've identified, to work with them. And we have various interventions. It could be a backpack check every morning. It could be just showing up at the counselor's office so she can see how your demeanor is. So there are several different interventions that are used for inside threat students that have been identified. Again, in our Navigator 360, we have them identified.
Okay. So being conscious of time, I'm going to ask the last question. We have a lot of incredible ones, and please do email us on that. The last one we can try to tackle real quick. What mentor programs are available for our students? How do you encourage parent involvement?
There are a number of things. One is just to go to your schools, and you've got kids in that school, and go to the city administration and say, I want to get involved. One of the best things that came out, it was on the news months ago, was the dad's on duty at one of the high schools in Shreveport. There was a school that had been having fights, all kinds of stuff. All of a sudden, the guys from the neighborhood, because we had a lot of kids that didn't have dads, they decided to be there, and it really changed the outlook in the school. All of a sudden, the fights went away. I will tell you, when I was at the principal at Wichita Falls High School, I couldn't keep my cafeteria clean. And I tried student council, and nobody paid attention to them. I tried my athletes, we had fights. So I just sat there and talked to one of my parents who happened to be minister of the African Methodist Episcopal Church in town. He said, let me bring some parents and grandparents over here. I paid to bus them to my school and bus them home, gave them lunch every day. They watched the lunchroom. You could eat off that floor after about 3 days because they were watching the kids, respected them. They took care of it. They were paying attention. And they didn't mind getting in a couple of kids' faces and go, I know your mom and I want to do so-and-so if you don't pick up that crap. And so there's things that have to happen like that, but it's never a problem for you to go up and volunteer in that school just to be there. And that way you kind of see what's going on, because there are a lot of times that a lot of information gets out that's not accurate, it's not correct, and you can sit there and go, no, that's not right. I had a young man when I was in Clean that was on the news out in front of the school, and I saw him, and he was going, you can buy news in here for $150. And I had $200 in my pocket. I gave it to him. He said, go find me one. And tell me what's news. He couldn't do it. He was just mouthing off, and they put it on the news. And so he had to get past that. And sometimes a lot of stuff that gets out that, all that information is erroneous and wrong. But you've got to get to the right kind of communication all the time.
I would just touch on that. Burville ISD is a great district. As a former high school principal, mentorships to me should be organic. And by that, I mean, get the kids involved in something. Get them involved in an activity, extracurricular activity And then that extracurricular activity should have a character education component to it. I always met with my coaches, always met with my sponsors, and I said, our goal is to have 85 to 100% of our kids involved in something. Now, there are only so many uniforms, so then that's when you have to get a robotics club, an engineering club, student council, but you have to get kids involved, and then they have to run for office. They have to learn how to win, they have to learn how to lose, they have to learn how to compete, and that's a natural, organic way to have mentoring happen in a school through the marvelous clubs and programs that we have. We just need kids to get involved. Our band should be end zone to end zone on Friday nights. And that's what we want. We want to see kids involved.
And if I could add something else, actually, if the school doesn't have a really cool program that your kid is interested in, I would say look to the local community colleges. In my experience, I don't see student clubs at colleges rejecting a high schooler that wants to get involved. They're usually curious that this high schooler wants to be involved in, for example, a pre-law club or an engineering club at a community college. But more than that, they're usually eager because they can have someone they can kind of look after that's younger than them. And these high schoolers now have someone that's not in their 30s or 40s, but is still within that age range that they're a mentor. They're older than them, they're in college, but they can also be relatable in that age difference. So that's another really cool mentorship option. I know Tarrant County College is only, 15 minutes from TCC at max, I mean from BISD's campuses. So, and you know what, if the kid's involved in the college, they might come back and say, well, you know what, I saw what the college did, I want to try to replicate that now at ISD. How can we get that ball rolling? And you're creating now, you're really now honoring that community mindset in a way that's even more creative and exciting and helpful. Anyway, I don't want to take over. We have only about 5 minutes left. What I'm thinking is we'll ask all the guest speakers to have a 1 minute close. Before we do that though, if everyone could just clap again, I really appreciate that. And beyond that, I will let you guys do your 1 minute closing, and then after that, if possible, I'd love to say a few last words as we all figure out.
Well, I want to thank Dr. Tolbert for this opportunity, and if I can tell you, Chris, you've been amazing. You're a young man doing a great job, and I'm very proud of you, and I'm more optimistic about our future, seeing young men like you doing what you're doing. So thank you very much.
If you have any questions for me, my name's on the website. If you look at our Northwest Central Police Department, you'll see under the Community Resources Division has my phone number and my email. So if you have any other questions for me, feel free to let me know and I'll be happy to answer for you.
I would tell you, for parents, get involved in the schools. For everybody else, community members, get involved in the schools, go ask them the questions. Go talk to your city council, ask them the questions too, because we all work together to try to make this a great learning environment and safe place for our kids. So just, you're here today, so you're one of the top 5% of the people doing the right stuff anyway, but get involved and stay involved.
So I'm very appreciative to have been asked to be here. I'm very impressed with this panel. Thank you all very much. Captain Wright, thank you. And the ones that I know, thank you. Young man, I hear I say amen twice to what Dr. Showell said. What an impressive event you've put together and how well spoken you are is a testimony to Burkeville ISD. I just will say, I was in France on a lifetime vacation that my wife and I had been planning, dreaming about for 32 years actually, and she's a French teacher. So I promised her, like when we were courting, of course I'll take you to France. So I made good on that promise after 31 years. And we were in France, and I won't take long. Uvalde was international news. They were lighting candles in different parts of the world, and they were highlighting that in France in different languages on their world broadcast networks. And they were asking, questions. When's America gonna pay attention? And and we stayed with friends that my wife has there, and they were asking questions about it. It just became so and I'm so compelled about this subject matter because of, my training. This is so important. And then Dr. Tolbert sends an email to me, and I'm like, I don't know if I can get back in time and get prepared for that. This is extremely important subject matter. I just want to say the whole world is talking about it, but what's important is that we're talking about it as a community, because that is where the issues bear themselves into success for us. There's no right answer that can be extrapolated to every community. Every community is different, so every community has to have this conversation all the time. This issue evolves. We have seen that. Things change. And we do need to learn from our mistakes. We need to do that in a very kind way. Grace, mercy, and we need to move forward constantly. The conversation is never going to end. Always be involved. Don't be afraid of it. Don't get tired of it. I mean, I'm tired of it. What I mean is stay at the top of this conversation. The more we do, the more success we're going to see.
All I want to say is pretty much the same thing that the captain said. Is I'm on the school board, email and phone number right there. Give me a call anytime. That's what we're here for, is to answer questions. If I can't answer the question, which is a lot of times the answer, but I can hook you up with people like Dr. Showell who can answer the question for you. But we want to be there to answer those questions.
And I want to share before we leave, this was something that Dr. Tolbert had expressed interest in doing. So he was the gentleman who helped organize the flow of the event. He told me, hey, let's get this going after we did a discussion session about a month ago. So I want us to just know that Dr. Tolbert is leading, even after he's stepped away from being the president of the board. He's continuing to be out there to support the team. Beyond that, one thing that caught me when Dr. Ryan was talking was he mentioned how when he was working with Naval Academy students, if I'm correct, he didn't have similar problems like this. And this is something very interesting. This comes back to philosophy versus what we're trained. These naval students had a mindset of serving their country and taking personal responsibility for what they do, and that shaped how they approach stress and challenges. And I would say that all of us have a unique opportunity as community members that are here to try to honor that mindset of personal responsibility. And more importantly, young students, they react more to what they see than what they hear. So they see dads and moms and other students and other officers in the community leading by example. And taking personal responsibility for what is important, such as Carlos, for example, leading his community. That is what gets the students going. As a former BISD student myself, it was the teachers that I saw that led by example and were good role models. And when I went to college, the professors and ex-military students that I worked with that led by example, that led me to that mindset. It was never what I was told to think like, or even some of the textbooks that I was reading that talked about. So as you all leave today, please ask questions to the faculty and staff, to the leaders we have. And remember, these guest speakers we have here, they took personal responsibility to want to honor and support their communities. And that's why they're guest speakers today. Y'all have that ability to do that. And honestly, y'all have a great honor to do that, especially the young students here that are here when they probably could be, at a dinner or an event. You guys all are heroes in that sense. And I would ask y'all to think of yourselves as heroes with a great honor to lead by example for our kids, so that they feel empowered and inspired to lead by example. And then that creates something that who knows what it'll get. With that being said, I'm going to cut the mic off. Let's give one last round of applause.